Hi everyone, thanks a lot for joining this session on mastering tendering success in contract catering and the food service industry. My name is Peter Beck and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Catering. And with me today I have brought three experts in this industry from different parts of the world to really, together with me, dive into and explore different part of tendering success. But I think before we dive into this very interesting topic, maybe let's do a quick round of introductions. Maybe starting with you, Simon.
Hello there, Simon Elliott. I'm managing partner of Forexi Global Consulting.
Very nice. Over to you, Chris.
Hi, so I'm Chris Stern, Managing Director and founder of Stern Consultancy. Been running tenders for the last 36 years, typically do 20 to 30 a year.
Very nice. And you, Pierre?
My name is Peer van Geurp. I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm a senior consultant within Hospitality Group.
Very nice. And could you maybe, all of you, give a little bit more, not the full length, but a little introduction into your experience in this sector and your journey into contract catering and what you are doing in this sector and this space?
Sure. Well, I've been in the food and facilities management sector all my career, originally from the UK, and I've had the good fortune for the business to take me all over the world, a couple of years in Australia, 14 years in San Francisco, and running global accounts with global footprints, which was really interesting and fun. And nearly 5 years ago now, we set up Forexi Global Consulting, which is a unique mix of service provider side folks like me, and also client side folks, my business partner Barbara Bowden, former global head of amenities at JP Morgan Chase. So we've been around for 5 years now, and 18 months ago I moved to Santiago, Chile, and we run global projects from Australia to India to Singapore to San Francisco and New York.
Very nice. Looking forward to also hearing a little bit of your perspective of how you see this being different across the world. Definitely interesting. Over to you, Chris.
Sure, I feel a bit parochial after that. We're kind of UK, although we do find ourselves in the Netherlands. I have a colleague there who I think some of you know, Danny, in the Netherlands. We work quite closely together. And in fact, I didn't realise you worked with Barbara Bowden, Simon, so I know Barbara quite well, having done some work for JP Morgan here in the UK. But yeah, I mean, we specialise in one market and one market only, which is food service. Predominantly business and industry. Right now, in terms of catering tenders, we've got people like Airbus, BNP Paribas, Bentley, Barber. We've got all sorts of companies out to tender right now, which is pretty normal for us. We also get involved in universities a little bit and sometimes in education. I've got an independent school just about to go momentarily. We don't only do tendering, we do an awful lot of client support, helping them make sure their caterers are doing the right job. As I say, it's purely catering. It's a weird little business, actually, very focused, very small. There's only 3 of us in the business, but keeps us interested in and out of so many different businesses.
Very nice. Then over to you, Pierre.
I'm feeling a bit shy when I hear these resumes of the fellow gentlemen, Simon and Chris. I work for Hospitality Group, as I said. It's a consultancy agency for 35 years now. We do facility, which food is and workplace development is just a part of it. We have 50 interim managers working all over the Netherlands and 50 more consultants. Those consultants work in, as I said, community, facility, sourcing organization, workplace and food. And I'm in the food team because that's the only language I speak. My background is a bachelor in hospitality. I used to have my own restaurant with my wife, etc. Via Detour, I became regional manager by Compass Group in the Netherlands just prior to COVID. During COVID and post-COVID was really an interesting time, as one can see, I think. Joined Hospitality Group to do multiple things. Part of it is concept developing, part of it is strategic consultancy, where tendering is a part of it. As an agency, we do this locally for governments, small companies, but also bigger multinationals. And for some clients, we do this also in EMEA region or worldwide, like the Googles and Netflix of these worlds. And we do also technical engineering, vision, mission concepting, and tendering.
And just some further context around Forexi. So we operate in what we call the away from home markets. So that's for people that work in education, healthcare, senior living and leisure. And we don't actually manage tenders or RFPs, but what we do is we work with clients in the background around strategy, around workplace, student experience, resident experience and patient experience.
It's interesting you say that, because I think the word student experience, workplace experience, it's the way the market's gone, isn't it? It's all about that now. Getting people back into the workplace. We're seeing a lot of that. But student experience, whenever we do anything in education, it's all about student experience.
Yeah, and the way we look at it, Chris, is that whether it be food or facilities or concierge services or amenities, we look at those as not just a function of output, but what do they create, what behaviors do they drive, and what experiences do they generate.
And is this one of the, like if you look at the tendering process and what clients are looking for over the last 5-10 years, has that been one of the major shifts that you have been seeing, or what are some of the key trends that you have seen developed over the last few years?
Well, sustainability has gone to the top of the pile. Although I'm slightly dubious about it. Everyone says we must have sustainability, that's got to be the top thing. When it comes down to it, and particularly actually if you talk to people, if you talk to stakeholders, yeah, they want it, but you know what they want even more? They want lovely food and they don't want to pay too much for it. So sustainability is ticking the corporate box, but actually when it comes down to it, it's the same old, same old. We've seen the whole workplace experience thing, and that genuinely is a change. That's really important now. We've seen post-pandemic in particular, more free food, and stuff to help people be attracted back to the office. Do you know what? People aren't going to come back to the office just because they get a free lunch or even a nice lunch. But if you can make that part of the whole experience. You look at the way offices are now, they're like playgrounds, aren't they? So catering has to be part of that. People that go into work, go into the office to collaborate with each other, they have meetings. And what do they do when they have a meeting? They have a cup of coffee and a bun. So that's really changed. What we've seen coming back this last year or so is costs are suddenly started to become important. And I think particularly as we've seen financial services and higher education with, I think they call them financial headwinds, don't they? So they're facing a few headwinds, and money has become important. I'm just in the middle of the reason I was late today was a senior client today talking to me about wanting to make significant reductions in cost. I think when it comes to it, though, if it hits the customer experience, they sometimes find themselves backpedaling. Because actually catering is an expense.
And to that point, Chris, I think what we saw was during COVID that costs somewhat went out of control a little bit. And it's taken a little time to get them back into control, which I think is important. I think it's that balance between the value for money of the investment that clients are making in food and facilities and amenities to what the outcomes are. And the important part of that is how do you measure those outcomes?
And how do you, like, if you look at like cost, that's always an interesting part. Of course, that's always a part of the tendering process and choosing a supplier. But how have you seen the role of cost change over the last few years, and also maybe how do you see it change in the future?
Difficult. Well, I think costs are increasing on multiple topics. There's food cost, which is growing massively. There is the cost for staff, the cost for knowledge in a way, how you make a concept. So also investment should be part of the tendering process more or less. You see quite often, because it was perhaps previous a small canteen, it should be now a fully operating all-day restaurant, because what Chris said, we're grazing all day, we don't have a lunch, we're just eating all day, starting in the morning till the end of the evening, or more to say. So the environment of the catering is also changing. So I think that's a big shift in increasing cost. But then there is an issue post-COVID, I think, with the capture rate. How can you divide your guests perhaps evenly over those 5 days? How can you deal with the peaks on Tuesday and Thursday we see in the Netherlands and Benelux area specific, which is, or you have nothing to do, or you have too much to do, which is really a challenge, I think, if you look into the performance of a caterer and how you deal with that. But it can be cost increasing as well.
But I think you're right. I mean, we're living in a world, particularly here in the UK, where costs are rising in a scary way. I mean, at the moment, it's labour costs. So we had the food cost inflation. That was a nightmare. We've had a year or two when things have stabilised. And here in the UK now, the new government, we're finding labour costs are going up. But we're finding clients are still asking for savings and they still want to control costs. It's critical to them. I mean, luckily, and Peter knows all about this, tech has come in and helped massively. So we're seeing AI in particular, AI tills in particular, are really massively helpful because that kind of thing is improving efficiency. It also improves flexibility, which is has always been an important thing in catering, but it's become even more important. So getting your workforce to be flexible is massive, and it's helping to reduce costs. On the other hand, there are still quite a lot of people, thank you Google, who give away food. So, I mean, that is still controlled. It's not as uncontrolled as you might think. They have a budget and just give it away willy-nilly. But they do recognise the value associated with it. But within that, they're still looking for ways of doing it more efficiently. And again, I think tech, flexibility, all of those things are coming in and increasingly important. So it's just the way our market's developing. It always, I've seen it over the years, the way our market develops becomes increasingly commercial, cost-focused, that's driving sales, quality focus. I mean, quality has to be there. It's a given. I don't know if you guys agree, but if the quality is not there, you might as well go home.
And maybe stating the obvious here, but I think that the food and the amenities mindset follows the mindset of the organisation overall.
Yeah.
We see a contrast between manufacturing and technology, for example. We see a contrast between financial services as well. But I had the good fortune to live and work in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and came across a really interesting culture because, with a high tech group in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, their motivations are somewhat very, very different to that of a manufacturing plant on the East Coast, for example, or up in Yorkshire, where I'm originally from. And really, it's around what behaviours can that drive in terms of providing food and amenities that really support the culture of the organisation. I mean, Nike was an example that I looked after for many years, including in Hilversum, by the way, Pierre, so just down the road from you.
Nice campus. Yeah.
And also in Shanghai and in Oregon, Portland, Oregon. What was interesting there was that as they looked at Shanghai and Beaverton, the contrasts and differences culturally, locally, not only in terms of the offering was very different, but also in terms of the cost model as well.
I think one of the things that we also see is also that it matters. As you say, Simon, one thing is like per client, like, okay, what is it that they want with the catering? Are they a hybrid company? Are they full-time in office? How do they tailor their offerings to this? But also the cost focus, as we see it at least, also varies a lot by industry. Is it primary schools, higher education, or workplaces? There's also, at least as we see it, some differences typically. How do you see that? Maybe especially, of course, UK primary school has been very pressured on cost here the last few years, but how do you see the differences from industries?
Well, I think Simon's really touched on the tech industries are one thing. Financial services, they remain very, I mean, Barbara will tell you, won't she, Simon? Cost is everything. They say they want great value, but cost is everything. But what they need along with that is they need quality. And quality of experience. It's not just quality of food, it's quality of experience. Is that much different in education? I don't think it is. I always think that the higher education market in particular has an awful lot in common with the workplace. And actually, wise people think whatever kids learn when they're at uni, they're the next people in the workplace. So their expectations begin when they're at university. And the expectation is pretty high when it comes to catering. They just won't use it. If it's not good, they won't use it. The biggest challenge is that it has to be cheap as well. I was very disappointed. Talking to a load of students about sustainability, and they were the ones who, really important. But actually, as long as it's cheap, we don't really care where the chicken comes from. It doesn't matter, as long as it's cheap. Which, I thought these are the guys who are meant to care about sustainability. And they really do.
And I believe that quality and experience spans all sectors. It's just different in different sectors what quality and experience actually means and to what extent you can fit it within the budget constraints ranging from K through 12 right the way through to large free food programs as examples.
A little curious on that sustainability part. Of course, we all hear about that being a big trend in the industry, but how do you see clients, like what do clients want from the caterer from a sustainability perspective? And what makes the difference from caterer to caterer? Like what is a leading or a winning sustainability strategy or program from a catering perspective as you see it?
In my opinion, if we talk about sustainability, we should separate at least 3 topics: environmental consequences, social consequences, and governance, the ESGs. Because if we talk about sustainability, we talk about everything, but it's not, I think it's too broad of a word now to discuss.
Yeah, I agree.
So I will always advise my clients, or in the sessions with clients or with customers even, which part of sustainability are we talking about? Which part should we make impact? What are we measuring here, and for what cause? So that's a one, I think. I receive a lot of positive influence if we separate those 3 topics, so to say. So to your question, Peter, your question back would be, on which part of sustainability do you mean this? Is it
I
about
think the interesting part is also to hear, like, from your perspective, okay, is it the environmental, is it the social thing, or is it the, like, what of the elements do you feel like the client values and puts the most emphasis on, and where they actually want the results and the changes to happen?
In my opinion, it's all about the footprint, because that the food part is some part. The caterer has one-to-one. They are the buyers of all the food, so they control it more or less. So as a client, you have a guidance about which percentage you reach a certain plant-based menu or something, and then we need a lot of data to control it, and to, I think, perhaps also make a roadmap what it is today, measure it today, and then look forward. Social sustainability is a bit harder to define, I think. It says a lot of the DNA of the client, so to say. In the industry, like a blue-collar industry, it doesn't matter too often. In a corporate environment, it's really important. So that's really specific, in my opinion, within those typical contracts.
I was going to say, I think Pierre is absolutely right, because sustainability has become a big label that catches everything. At 4XI, that we are made up of a group of practices, and one of our practices is sustainability simplified, using the word simplified for a reason, because when we start talking about UN SDGs and the various terminology and jargon within the big world of sustainability, it becomes very confusing very quickly. And we believe that using the word simplified is doing the right thing is the right thing to do, and doesn't need to be overcomplicated about whatever you are trying to achieve in terms of your outcomes, whether they be environmental or social.
Yeah, I think, do you know, there's a load of boxes that people need to tick, and the procurement divisions who are getting increasingly involved in catering tenders will talk to their sustainability, the catch-all, their sustainability people within their organisation, and they'll insist on a whole load of box ticking. But what it really comes down to is how do suppliers differentiate themselves? They're all doing reduction in single-use plastics. All of those things, those all in theory happen. Whether they actually follow them through is another matter. But in theory, they do all of that. How do people differentiate themselves? And there are very few suppliers in our experience that really mean it. A lot of them are passive, and they do everything that's expected of them, and they appear to do a little bit more sometimes, but you can tell it's kind of through gritted teeth, because what they're really about is making money, and particularly the big ones. So, you know, the Compass Groups of this world, their sustainability agenda is fantastic, it's enormous. Does it actually end up at the sharp end? It's always a really tough one for any big organisation to make that happen, all those central initiatives. So some of the smaller companies, some of which are founded, I can think of 2 here in the UK, who are founded on social value. And that is very appealing to some clients, to sophisticated, mainly wealthy clients. So financial services, whatever it might be, they get quite excited by that. When I was in one the other day, and they said, "Oh, we've just got 10 tons of Wagamama kebabs. I've got them in the freezer. I need to do something with them," because they get loads of products from loads of suppliers for nothing that they can then distribute to homeless people, and they get their clients involved, and it's part of their organisation. Those kind of initiatives are what differentiate and excite the market, because I actually think we've almost reached steady state on a lot of the standard sustainability things, and they're all ticking the boxes, and then we have to go and look for something else. So if that's truly important to a business, they've got to really dig deep and see what's really going on and what's really available.
I think up to that point, Chris, that it's very difficult to retrofit sustainability into an existing legacy organisation. So those organisations that are founded on social values, it's a much easier journey for them to actually make an impact on the front line. Another test in our view is, if you look at an organisation and their sustainability pictures, SDG pictures, that they're much the same, really, is to understand what level of resources they actually have to actually drive those commitments through to realization.
When you talk with these clients, let's stay focused on B&I mainly. When you talk with these business and industry clients, and they of course all want sustainability of different forms, how much do you see it from the client side being a tick box exercise where they need to make sure that it's a caterer that complies with their requirements and also their future goals, and how much do you see that it's a true differentiation factor where they actually choose caterer based on how well they perform on a sustainability agenda?
Do you know, I'm in the middle of evaluating a tender right now, and we were told 15% has to be CSR. And here's the CSR questions we put them in. And I said, right, come on, we'll develop our evaluation workbook. How are we going to do that? So, well, that all happens automatically with the CSR bit. We'll focus on it. It's just lip service. And it's so much of that is lip service. I mean, I'm sure it will be 15%. Someone somewhere will tick the boxes. Have they ever? Instead of, I thought someone would actually read the bids and actually do something other than say, yeah, they're right, no, they're wrong. But actually, who's going to really add value? And I have to say, I think that's really typical.
Can I address that, Chris? Because it also depends how you write your program of requirements. If it's output driven or input driven, if a client demands you should tick the box and that's it, I would always love to emphasize the opportunity to create a business case for the caterer. Just show me how will you do it. If you have, of course, you need to match the minimum requirements we state in the program of requirements, but then surprise me. What can you do more? Just
completely agree.
Invite those caterers to give them a showpiece and draft the future instead of me or the client having a really restricted frame where they should be within, because then you probably miss a lot of beautiful initiatives if you put more like an output-driven program of requirements. So it all starts there, and perhaps it starts already with the vision of the concept.
And I think that's a really great point. I think that's a really great point. I mean, the more prescriptive you are, the more that you restrict creativity from the partners, right?
Cheers.
I think if we dive a little bit deeper into that, like let's say we have a fictive tender here for a bank or a tech company or some kind of B&I client, and you get all these responses in, you get all these clients to do presentations of different forms. What do you see as like some of the key factors, key differentiators that really make a caterer stand out and ultimately win the contract over their competitors? If we take cost aside and look purely on quality, what does quality look like from your perspective?
I think if you look into the quality of food, you can look into the way they purchase their foods. Sometimes I read an agricultural piece because they bought a piece of land and they start farming there as a caterer. So they have the whole chain in command. So they're in command of the whole chain: production, sourcing, seasonal menu engineering, etc. So then they can really show off in a more or less, that's something else compared to the most regular caterer, I think. Then you really stand out. That's one way to do it, I think, instead of just buying local stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of quality, we're seeing a lot of investment in culinary, particularly in the London market. Every caterer has some really high quality culinary expertise that they can call on and they can drop into sites. That's kind of more powerful in the sales process, in the tender process. That's more powerful than all the sustainability stuff, which, you know, you sit in a presentation and a chef brings some food and talks to you about it. Everyone gets excited. The sustainability comes on. You can almost hear the whole room groaning because it's not sexy. It's not exciting. You know, there might be someone in the room who's passionate about it, but most people are far more passionate about the chef showing them something really interesting and something they've maybe not seen before. And then you've got to make sure, does that all feed through? It's no different to sustainability, taking all the rest of it. They will talk about it. Are they going to deliver it is the big question. So what's their resource? And the proof sourcing. Can you go and talk to some of their other clients and see whether they're doing it or not?
And I think that's also another great point, because during the sales process, that's the most unreliable way to measure the quality of the performance post-award. And the best way to go and measure that is to go and see them in action and meet their people, talk to their people, experience the experience to ensure that there's not a mismatch between sales and reality.
Yeah,
you've
exactly
actually got
the
to
same
measure.
point I would like to mention. Sometimes you have those show ponies, a chef from another contract, and he's killing it, but there was not the actual chef or your regional manager or your location manager. And in the end, you end up with totally different team, which they can't match the expectations they made during the sales process. And that's something I really take my responsibility to in my piece of work, to double check that. Who's on the other end of the table? Is it the actual my actual contact for the client, or is it just somebody from another contract?
I think that's part of our job. If we're busy in the market, which hopefully we all are, we should know and have experience of how each different caterer operates, and more fool the client who doesn't listen to us. So I've got one at the moment, and they insisted on inviting one particular bidder. I knew they were inappropriate. I said so, and lo and behold, their bid didn't even land in the end, because we knew that something like that would happen. So we ought to have that expertise to know whether caterers deliver or not. So whatever the promise is, can they deliver it? Another client I've got at the moment, they're saying that they don't particularly want to go and have a look at what the caterer does in other sites, because that, to use your expression, Pierre, it's a show pony. They wouldn't be bidding if we didn't think they could do it. But what we do want to do is we want to talk to some of their clients. I think they've I think they're being a bit optimistic about how easy it is to actually talk to clients, because everyone's so busy these days. But it does make an awful lot of sense. Go and talk to a couple of their clients. We've now started asking in bids. When we ask for references, we say, can we have 2 references from existing clients? And can you give us a reference from the last client you lost? Because I want to hear why. And that's quite interesting. Again, I'd like to think that we're busy enough we actually see what happens when people win and lose, and we form opinion. I mean, we have to start every project with everyone in the market, but we'll have an opinion about them.
Also curious on both, like, which role do you see you as consultants, or if you're not actual IFP, like you, Simon, like the consultants managing the IFP, which role do you see they playing in the evaluation versus the client? How do they support? And also curious, as a consultant that manages RFPs, to which degree do you see that it's the actual people that you meet in the tendering process from the caterer that gives you the expectation to this tender, or your general expectation that you develop with this catering company over tens of tenders and also actual client results that you have seen over time? So curious on both those areas, actually.
So I suspect that our relationship is somewhat different to Piers and Chris's relationships. Deliberately and purposefully do not manage tenders, and we don't influence tenders. What we do is we help build client strategy and align that strategy to the outcomes that they're trying to achieve, and then to create frameworks to be able to facilitate that. So we don't influence RFP or tender outcomes at all. But what we do is that we do advise in the background to make sure, because I'm sure we've all been there before, that there's a lot of emphasis often placed on the presentation day. And from a service provider's perspective, often there's a big investment in that presentation day and bringing in the dog and pony show, chefs from other accounts, to your point, Pierre, and to create this very fabricated environment that's not real. And, to your point, Chris, about references of existing clients and past clients is important to pursue. Of course it is, as is to go and see the sites and the quality of the operations in action themselves. But it's difficult for the clients sometimes to not get clouded by the dog and pony show, and that becomes overly influential in their client group.
But isn't that partly our job, to actually say to a client, what you're seeing today isn't normal? Because if a caterer comes and does a presentation and brings all this gorgeous food, we should be able to say, do you know what? You'll see that because we've seen it in 6 sites. Whenever we turn to, we know you're going to get that. Or I've never seen them do anything like this. And by the way, that chef there doesn't really work for them, or whatever it might be. And exactly the same when you go out on a reference visit, which is for me far more important to see them in action on site. I don't know about you. I go up to customers. I say, well, this is really lovely here, isn't it? Is it always this good? And that's great fun when someone says, "Oh, no, I don't know what's happened today. It's looking absolutely brilliant. Never usually this good."
So I think you're right, Chris, but here's my reaction to that. Therefore, what's the point of the dog and pony show? I was involved in a major pursuit 2 or 3 years ago where one of the service providers invested just short of $1 million to put on a presentation day. And I can see your face, Chris. It was basically creating the future space that they were proposing in a showcase building in downtown Manhattan, right? So there was 50 folks involved. There was investment in infrastructure, in renting the place for 3 days, etc. And it was just short of $1 million. So I agree with you. But therefore, what's the point of the dog and pony show? Go and see them in action yourself with the operators that are actually going to deliver the service that you're seeking. That's our point of view and how we.
Yeah, I completely agree. I do think, again, I suppose it's part of our. We reckon people very rarely win a bid based on a visit or a presentation, but I've seen people lose them. And it's not just about what the client sees in terms of food and beverage when they're on site. It's also about relationship. And sometimes they just don't get on. Because you know what? I mean, the London market in particular, you'll know, is really, really competitive. And there's some outstanding caterers there, but they all do lovely layered yogurts. They all do, everything's lovely. So it actually very often comes down to relationship and believability.
Yeah.
So building that relationship and making sure that the client meets the right people. Again, I think it's partly our job to facilitate that, so that when we're organising those things, we sometimes have a little bit of an off the record with the caterer and say, look, you need to do this, or sometimes on the record, sometimes off the record.
I think, Chris, in this time where we use artificial intelligence, where we creating those beautiful dashboards, sometimes we're too much focused on data instead of the people. And I think it's still a people's business. So let's focus more. That's perhaps one of the takeaways, if you ask me, is next to data driven, you need to invest in the relationship during the tender process. Take multiple meetings, sessions, create something in your tender process where you can do a deep dive on collaboration only. Because it's easy when everything is good and beautiful to become friends. But create something in the tender process where you can test the relation. What if we have a critical situation? What will you do in this fictional conflict? Let's discuss this. Then I can react. Then I can measure your reaction. Then I can look you in the eyes and say, okay, I like the way you approach this. I don't like it. And then that's for me already learning you as a caterer, and also learning to decide if you are the ultimate partner for this process or not, for this contract. And also let's not focus on the first year of the contract and the onboarding process, but let's please also focus on the whole period of the contract. Because what I also still often see, it's a great performance in the first 6 months. It's probably a perfect performance in the last 6 months, but everything in between could be a less of a performance. So I think if you look into KPIs and contract management, performance management, there's also a job for us consultants or partners, to guide this as well, protect it in a way. So let's focus on people as well.
Yeah.
So I think that, absolutely mirror what Chris and Pierre were just saying around, it's about culture, people and relationships. And what we do is we run a partnership optimization program for new and existing relationships. So once the client's awarded, to get the parties in the room together. So we did one in London recently where we had the food service provider, the facilities management and the client in a room for a day and a half to get together to identify beyond the contract, beyond the RFP, but what is the purpose, vision, mission, values of the relationship? What are we trying to and aiming to achieve as a result of our relationship? And then to map out the behaviours, the cadence of communication, who's responsible, who's accountable. And at the end of that day and a half, to produce what we call the partnership charter that becomes the cornerstone of the relationship and referred to throughout the relationship. Everything from annual business reviews, quarterly, monthly, but every operations meeting in a condensed format, it becomes the framework of the relationship all the way through to the frontline associates, that they have even a little pocket, something as simple as a pocket card with the key values of why they're in business together.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. We've now started to put into every tender, either we dictate what the meeting schedule will be, so the cadence of meetings, that's either in there, or we ask people, what are they going to do? And as I said before, I mean, if you actually then make sure you meet the right people. We had an interesting experience recently. Client took forever, it took them a year to decide which caterer they wanted to go to. They eventually made a decision. We then got to contract. And our client was very, very contractual, as was the caterer they chose. And after 3 months of toing and froing with the contract, the client decided that contractor was not for them because they were just too contractual, and they went to a much, much smaller supplier who said yes to everything. And lo and behold, so I mean, that is the proof of, can you work together? I think, to your point, Simon, can you actually work together? And there, it was a match made in hell rather than in heaven. And they've ended up with someone who I'm sure is going to do a great job for them.
And I think that's
If you were then like at the owner or a sales executive in of a country catering business, like what is the actual advice? What would you actually do to win more tenders, to grow more? What are some of the key bits that you would recommend those people?
Listen to the client, align yourself. I can't believe how many of them don't listen. They neither listen and they don't read the tender. So, I just got one back, the one I'm doing at the moment. The tender bid, they haven't set the numbers out the way we asked them to. They haven't even said why. It's just really annoying. So you start off on the wrong foot. Have they listened to the client? The client wants complete transparency. They put their figures together. They're not transparent. So we're going to have to start the process, the evaluation process, aligning, which hopefully we will. But if we can't, that tells a story, doesn't it? But listening is the thing that most of them are rubbish at.
I'm going to add on to that, because I think you're perfectly right. We believe listen to learn to understand.
Yeah.
Right? And I think the other part of that is, to answer your question, Peter, is that ease of doing business is a real thing. And I remember in Silicon Valley, a tech client, that we actually got to the 15th MSA because of lawyers' involvement, right? And the client said to me, look, Simon, we really, and that was back when I was in the service provider side, the client said to me, look, Simon, we really love you and the team and what have you, but you're really hard to do business with. And
It's critical.
There's lessons to be learned there. I mean, we've been going through a global process in the last couple of years, and it's evident that some organizations are much more easy to do business with than others. And that's a big lesson, I think, for them to learn.
I find it also really difficult to talk with you doing this podcast. It's really, really difficult to reach out and have a good conversation. Not at all. Not at all. It should be so easy as being polite and do what's being asked. And sometimes it's a mismatch, as Chris says already before it started.
Yeah.
What else I
And
would like to address, Peter, if I may, is for a caterer, they're all chameleons sometimes. They would like to be anybody, everybody. And sometimes I think they could even be more particular in who they really are, what their strengths are, and stick to that. Because sometimes they say, yeah, I can do this, I can do everything, I can become everything, anyone. But that's not the case in the end. So I'd rather have a caterer said, okay, thank you for this RFP, but we don't join it because it's not us. That saves a lot of trouble in the end. Or during the tendering
There's a shortcut
process.
to that, though. There's always a shortcut to it. And the one I mentioned earlier, where the client insisted on including a caterer, all you have to say is, what else can you show me that you already run that's vaguely similar to what we're tendering? And if they can't show you something that's relevant, I know we should always give people an opportunity to do something new. But actually, depending on the client, if they're not already doing it somewhere else, they're not going to get the job, because when it comes down to it, not many clients are going to go with someone that can't prove that they understand that particular market in one way or another. It does occasionally happen, and I love it when it does, by the way, when we can involve. We appointed a fabulous little events company into a livery hall in London recently. They've never done another livery hall, but that client said, I want someone who doesn't already do this. I want something different. So we listened, they listened, and they got the job, and it's going very well. So far, so good.
And what do you see, like, it has been touched upon a couple of times, but I'd just love it to get a little bit more concrete as well. Like, what do you see as being like the top one thing, like the key thing that really determines the tenders? I heard relationship be mentioned. I heard a couple of other things, but what is the thing that really determines the tenders? Like, is there like one or two factors that you see like, okay, that's typically the thing that ends up determining if we go with A or B?
It's never any one thing. It can't be, because it's complex. There's a lot of moving parts in catering. So the cost has got to be competitive. That's obvious. You take that. The quality has got to be what the client expects, and ideally pushing the boundaries. They've got to prove they already do it. And actually, the very first word you used was relationship. The client has got to work with the caterer. Those are, off the top of my head, what do I miss? Those are the four things that I immediately would think of.
Very nice. If we then move on a little bit, and then I'm also a little curious on the consolidation that we have seen in the industry in many different markets, both in North America, where you are a lot, Simon, or in the UK and Netherlands and so on. We can see a lot of the big caterers start to fill a large share of the market. And I'm very curious to also, how do you view that as consultants, but also how do you recommend the smaller caterers address and also, for the right tenders, outcompete the likes of Compass Group, Sodexo, Aramark, Elior, ISS, etc. How do you see this dynamic going, and what are the key things you, as a smaller company, but also as the big ones, need to be aware of in the way that this market is developing from your point of view?
It's really difficult at the moment, finding it, particularly if you've got a client that won't include more than one supplier with the same owner. So, if you take Compass Group, someone will only have Eurest, they won't have Eurest and Gather, for example. So there are just fewer players in the market. So we're finding ourselves inviting the same people more often than I would like. But that's just the way the market is at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's also depend on the strategy of your tender, because if it's just, and the scope, if it's just one office, one location, then you can go local, and then you need to look into the things you need, like some requirements on technical requirements or data requirements, because the small ones, they don't have the investment budget to invest in overhead development, like sourcing, dashboarding, being data driven. That costs a lot of money for a small company. But then it's up to the client to decide how important it is, or if they can do a part of it as well. And then you can do it like a more partnership. If you really would like to have just a contract, then I think the big ones, it's an easy target to target them. But for the small ones, I can imagine to be a small caterer and being part of a European tender that costs so much capacity on the office, so many hours, so many investments during the tendering process. But if it's a European tender, then you're stuck. So we as a consultant can't help facilitate that. That's where our hands are tied, so to say. I see the consolidation as well, Peter, but there's no really a big one answer to it. Especially if you look into international contracts, then I can't see really a different strategy.
I think the consolidation is probably set to continue. I've got a few observations on this, that the small organisations can turn that to the advantage, because for all the things that we talked about on this call around why choose a partner, well, you've got to believe them, they understand you, ease of doing business, and they're going to deliver what you're actually looking for. Going back to the big players, when there are global bids, even the big players don't necessarily have fully global footprints, some more than others, right? And then that makes it difficult for the smaller, either regional or national or local operators. But the ability to look somebody in the whites of the eyes of the owner of a smaller organisation to say, I am going to deliver the promise to you, is a very, very powerful sell. And Chris, you probably remember him, bless him, Jerry Brand was brilliant at doing that, right? And as you know, having spent the past 14 years in the United States market, that's an interesting market as well, because as compared with the UK market, it's very busy. Whereas in the US, it's not a massive field. I think probably the playing field in the UK is maybe as equal to the number of players in the US market. I think the challenge in the US market is that there's bigger barriers to entry often for the smaller organisations.
It's a bigger beast. Just on that, I mean, I'm always quite interested when people talk about global deals and all the rest of it. And I'm yet to find a real benefit to doing a global deal. I remember asking a client once, why do you want, it means we're dealing with people at the most senior level. Tell me what the benefit of that is. Because exactly as you said, there are very few companies that truly operate globally. Even Compass don't, actually. They say they do, but they don't. They're all separate companies. What's the point? What is the point in trying to put it all together? It means you can't go to any more interesting suppliers.
So here's my reaction to that, and I think it comes back to the experience. We're talking about business and industry now, right? I think organizations, and we've seen several clients over the last several years, as they expand their global footprints, they want some similarity to the employee experience with some regional localization to it, of course, as I made the point about the difference between Shanghai and Sydney earlier. So I think consistency is really important, more important for clients. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you need one or two global partners, because there are no true global partners. You can do and achieve that is by creating a set of global standards, a global operating framework and a global governance framework. So agnostic to supplier, they're operating within the client governance framework.
I'm curious to maybe hearing both from you, Simon, and Pia, what are your feeling on how technology has also changed the landscape for contract caterers and also the role that it plays both in the tendering, the retention, and also in creating the workplace experience or the student experience that the client is seeking after?
This is almost like the same as I mentioned with sustainability. What do you mean with technical improvement or with data improvement? Which part of are we discussing? Is it how can automation helps the operation, like using a different production or different robots instead of people? You see quite often now it's improving. But also what I see in AI, if I look in the tendering process, I think that the majority of the texts I'm reading are produced 100% or at least a part by artificial intelligence. So what is it worth what I'm reading? That's really hard for me to define if I'm reading it now in the tendering process. I even see now companies like little startups where you can load your program of requirements and the perfect text will be delivered. So again, there's no reality in that, in my opinion. There's no truth in there. That's not adding value to it. It's just writing down what needs to be heard, but that's not really a particular caterer adding value there.
So would you generally prefer caterers to, because I think there's mainly two reasons I would assume on why caterers use these tools to bid in tenders. One is to efficiency on their end, speed on writing and delivery, and also because they maybe generally think that it has the potential to improve their responses. But would you actually rather have a more authentic and own written tender bid, and then they maybe bid for fewer tenders? Or
no, I think in the end it's just a standard part of the process of the tendering. You need to have some pieces on paper, but then the magic is there when you go into the relation, into the contact moments, in your client sessions, into past tasting of or the reference check, etc. I think the value of the bid, the process of the written process is just losing its value, I think, in my opinion. And I think the magic is more there when you have client contact, because then you can, as we said, invest on the relation. If I look into data and dashboarding, it's huge. Everybody is shouting, need more data, where's the proof of your data, what's the chain of the data, what is the original, how do you measure it, how can we compare it? So sometimes I think we get lost into the big data. What am I looking at and why? And what's the analysis of the data? I think that's the more important part, because it's easy to create a beautiful dashboard, a beautiful graph, but it doesn't, what's the meaning of it? And look into that. I think that's where things can be confusing.
maybe what about you, Simon? How do you see catering play a role in the workplace experience and actually being in the restaurant, no matter if it's a university or B&I side or similar?
I think the access to data to give you insights that mean something is really important, to the point that Pia made. Going back to the technology question, I think that technology that drives the consumer experience, regardless of which sector they're in, is really important. And one example of that is if you look at the airline industry, In 2009, American Airlines created the first airline app. Now, I don't think there's an airline out there that doesn't have an airline app anymore. Same to the banking experience, right? So the future of the human experience, whether you're at work, in education, in healthcare, in senior living, or at leisure, the technology that can help and improve the overall experience is really important, I think. And what I mean by that, and it's not just when they're in the building, but from home to a commute, to arrival, to in the building or the place of work or rest or play, and all the way back again. So technology linked to the human experience, I think, is really, really important.
Very nice. Before we round off the session here, I would just love to get your perspective a little bit on like what are some of the biggest trends, what are some of the biggest changes you foresee into the future? If we walk into the industry in 10 years from now, what do you think are some of the key things that will have changed, and what are some of the tendencies you already see now shaping the future of contract catering?
Smaller, more nimble, more local, more personalized.
In addition to that, I think also more flexible pricing models instead of fixed models.
Yeah, and diving quickly into the flexible modules of pricing, do you mean from the caterer to the client perspective?
I think like fixed fee agreements are not sustainable anymore, and you see more often more flexible models because it's harder to predict and forecast the capture rate in the building or the catering environment. And also because looking into the future, there's a lot of discussion in Holland and here in Europe about what type of policy the clients have with working hybrids, working from home or not. So if you have a fixed contract for 5 years, we don't know what the exact policy will be in 3 years from now. So you need to have flexibility there also with the volumes of your catering, so also in your financial model.
Very nice. Any last notes from any of you on this tendering subject? Any last thing you want to share? Otherwise, we'll round off the discussion and the talk here now.
Listen, learn, understand. It's about relationships and your ability to deliver upon the promise.
Beautiful ending.
For me, as an addition, because it's very true what Simon says, is have a bit of fun if you're there. Sometimes we're getting so serious and just have a bit of a fun moment as well, because I think that also contributes to better work and output.
Very nice. Very good notes. Thanks a lot, all three of you, for participating and participating in this. Really appreciate it.